Hey, Shalom Akim, Shalom, Shalom, all praises, glory and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem, Rakak, Wadash, double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone for teaching us his truth and salutations to the sincere Akim and Akwatham. Listen, may the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Brother Roquai. I'm back in here with another quick and Lord's will as always an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I kind of just wanted to do a bit of a continuation in regards to, excuse me, in regards to self-esteem, proper, healthy self-esteem, cultivated in Yahweh Bashem Yahushai, and not essentially attaching your self-worth by by carnal things, right? So I just wanted to touch on a little topic like that because sometimes especially if you're a young man, and coming into the understanding, a lot of us coming out of Babylon the Great and its affiliates, this low vibration culture, it perpetuates a vibration that you have to have a lot of physical things in order to feel more of a man, right? And that being said, you it's a plus if you do have those things. If you work to get your own your own spot, your own vehicle, the Lord bless you with these things, like all praises, right? Thawadi Yahweh Bashem Shai, right? But the healthy mindset is to not what's the word I'm looking for? Not to attach your self-esteem by having these things, right? And that's a lot of the things, when you come out of a culture that strongly pushes the vibration of essentially, having, you gotta have six figures, you gotta have six-pack abs, you gotta have, all these different, I guess, carnal things, so to speak, right? It pushes a vibration that, a lot of men overly focus, especially Israelite men, overly focus on acquiring the carnal things, right? But if they didn't have the carnal things, they feel less of. And that's the point of, and the objective really of this lesson is to um, take a spiritual mind shift. Let's subdue that understanding, that low vibration, low Babylonian understanding, right? So I want to get two precepts. This is Wisdom of Solomon 9 verse 15, and it says, "For the corruptible body presseth down the soul, and the earthly tabernacle weigheth down the mind that museth upon many things." Right. So when you see the culture that that we're not part of this world, but we navigate through this world, in this vibration that it strongly pushes is to have a lot of these essentially carnal things to make you feel more than a man, right? But the point is that a lot of these people don't exemplify and have the spiritual things. They don't have the spiritual riches. They don't even have a healthy fear of Yahweh Bashim Shai, right? So, the objective is to subdue that. As a matter of fact, let me get that first. Next, I should say. Because there's a lot of things about, it's about coming out of Babylon, like the scriptures talk about, come out of her, my people. A lot of the things, we're slowly like shaking off and have to properly cultivate a healthy mindset, in tune with Yahweh Bashim Shai, right? So this is second Ezra 14 verse 34, and it says, "Then therefore if so be that ye will subdue your own understanding and reform your hearts, ye shall be kept alive, and after death ye shall obtain mercy." Right? So we have to subdue this, that low vibration understanding, in thinking that, okay, if you have, that makes you, keeping having a vehicle, and having a house or a spot, that makes you more of a man. And when I say that, like, I'm saying that in the sense that people um overly brag about the physical things to make themselves more like a man, and if they didn't have those things, they essentially feel less of a man, right? you know um that's one of the biggest problems with this culture, because it strongly overemphasizes the acquiring of the physical things and not enriching the spiritual things, right? Not enriching proper character, mercy, fear of the Lord, not exemplifying these different traits, these different fruits of the Spirit that the Apostle Paul talks about in Galatians, the 5th chapter. You don't see and hear and emphasize you know an emphasis, excuse me, of these different traits. So the objective is to us constantly, like when we dive into the scriptures, we our minds are being cleansed from these different low vibrational ways, because that's what when you see Jake, especially entertainment, I was going to say agriculture, athleticism, these different areas where Jake, and you see Jake excelling in, that's really the vibe, that's really the thing. We're gonna get and the rappers always talk about it too. They always say, we're gonna buy mama a house and all that kind of stuff. They always say they're gonna 12-car garage, right? Right. And they have a lack of abundance in the spirit, because you see how they can't navigate essentially when they do have a lot of these riches. So I just wanted to essentially, add and have a show a continuation of cultivating healthy self-esteem. And like I said, if a lot of brothers do have a lot of these things. You have what's it called, your own car, nothing. I'm not saying nothing is wrong with having these things, right? You need these things to move around. You use the world and you don't abuse it, right? But the objective of this lesson is really to attack this mindset of thinking that you need to constantly have these carnal things to make you feel more of a man in the spiritually, right? As opposed to being rich within the spirit, you know, because a lot of the things, and I've heard testimonies as well. For example, and I'll get this next precept, of a lot of dudes, for example, they will feel inadequate, because say for example, if they meet, a woman that they might be interested in, and they will feel less of if she has those things and the man doesn't have those things, right? Of course, we're not living in the ancient world, right? But at the same time, it's you don't want to have that mindset, because a lot of dudes that have that particular mindset, they essentially, it shows that one, they're inadequate in the spirit, and two, they don't see themselves as having substance unless they have those carnal things. And the objective of this lesson, like I said before, is to attack that mindset and be more rich in the spirit, whether you do have or you don't have those things, right? Hopefully all this is piecing together and making sense, right? So this is, one second. This is Ecclesiasticus chapter 40, verse 26. And it says, riches and strength lift up the heart, but the fear of the Lord is above them both. There is no want in the fear of the Lord, and it needeth not to seek help, right? So as a matter of fact, let me get that into GNT and see how smoothly that reads. Just bear with me on this. Let me just look for it. One second, Akim. think that was verse 26. Okay, this is the same precept. It's Ecclesiasticus 40 verse 26, and it says wealth in the GNT. It says wealth and strength give confidence, but the fear of the Lord can give you even greater confidence. When you fear the Lord, you need nothing more. It is all the support you need, right? So it provides a sentiment of more, essentially it's more faith if you really think about it. Right? Because when you think about like the first part of the precept, when it talks about wealth and strength, like of course if a man has those things, of course he's going to feel a little bit more confident, he's going to walk a little bit more, he's going to walk a little bit more boldly, like for example when payday come around, he might walk, physically he might have a little bit more bounce in his step, he might be a little bit more up, up what's the word I'm looking for, not upright, he might be a little bit more boastful, so you can imagine the type of mindset a lot of our people have, having just that alone. However, it clearly says that a person who has a fear of the Lord is above them both, right? Because you're keeping in mind and in tune with Yahweh Bashim Shai. It's not, so we're not boasting in the physical things that we have. That's, we boast in Yahweh Bashim Shai. Kind of like when David confronted Goliath, basically, right? So, let me jump to, where is it? This is one of my favorites. This is Luke 12, verse 15, and it says, and he said unto them, take heed and beware of covetousness, for a man's life consisteth not in the abundance of things which he possesseth, right? So the things that we have, these things don't make you as a character, these things don't define you as a person, they're just things that we use. The Lord blessed us with these different things, right? But really what it is, it's a man of understanding has an abundance of riches in the spirit. He doesn't have a lot of what's it called, the riches that he has, that's essentially like an add-on, so to speak. When King Solomon was essentially getting into that role of being the next king, one of the things that he prayed for was wisdom, right? He clearly said, like, oh Lord, Yahweh Bashim Shai, I'm but a child, give me essentially the instructions and the wisdom to be able to lead these people, to roughly paraphrase, right? That was part of his prayer, right, excuse me. It wasn't anything that he didn't ask for, the riches and all that kind of stuff, but because when you think about it, our people, that's the last thing on their mind, right? And even speaking from experience, that's one of the things people are drawn to you. It's because of that. It's not it's not at all, if you have a nice vehicle, or if you have a nice crib and all that. A lot of the people that, and I'm sure even other brothers can attest to this also, a lot of the reasons a lot of people, especially women, are drawn to you, a lot of it is because you have a certain glow, a certain shine, a certain rarity, a certain something very, very unique about you, and it's not, and they're perceiving it within the spirit. It's not something they can actually essentially see, right? They don't, you may not drive any of those things, you may not have the nicest place, or maybe you don't even have a place at all. Right? Maybe you live with family or friends or siblings or whoever, right? And having these things, it's an add-on. Yes, it does help, but at the same time, it doesn't make you as a character. It doesn't make you more wholesome, right? You're more whole whether you have them or whether you don't have them, right? That's the objective here. So, what was I? I kind of wanted to get this account. Just bear with me on this. Okay, this is Genesis chapter 41. I'll start at verse 14. And it says, Then Pharaoh called, I'm sorry. And Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him hastily out of the dungeon. And he shaved himself and changed his raiment and came in unto Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have dreamed a dream, and there is none that can interpret it. And I have heard say of thee that thou canst understand a dream to interpret it. And Joseph answered, and Pharaoh saying, It is not me, the Most High Yahweh, Bashim Shai, shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace. Right? So at this point in Joseph's life, he was actually in prison, right? And at this point, he was he gets sold into slavery, ends up in Egypt, and then he had a whole situation with the Pharaoh's wife, being falsely accused, and so on and so forth. Anyways, the point is, at this moment, Joseph had, I don't want to say he was, I guess you can say he was in a poor estate because he was in prison, right? But here's the kicker. Let me just continue reading. So it says, and Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have dreamed a dream. In my dream, behold, I stood upon the bank of a river, and behold, there came up out of the river 7 kine, fat fleshed, well favored, and they fed in a meadow, and behold, 7 other kine came up after them, poor and very ill favored and lean fleshed, such as I never saw in the land of Egypt for badness. And a lean and ill favored kine did eat up of the 7 fat kine. And when they had eaten them up, it could not be known that they had eaten of them, but they were ill favored as at the beginning. So I awoke. I saw in my dream, and behold, 7 ears came up, and one stalk full and good. Right. So he basically is explaining the dream to Joseph, right? And Joseph is able to give him the interpretation thereof, right? So let me just jump down, because Joseph ends up, kind of expounding on the dream for him, right? So, they were going to have a moment of good years, so plenteous harvest, and then they were going to have moments of famine, right? But the point of this the point of this account here is to show that Joseph, he was in a poor estate, but still at the same time, the Lord was with him, right? And two, going back earlier, he conducted himself in a fashion that he feared the Lord, right? Because he knew when the Pharaoh's wife hit on him, number one was wickedness, right? So he had a reverence for Yahweh Bashim Shai, and he had the talent of being able to break down and expound these different dreams, right? So him being in a low estate, he still had a sense, he had substance within his spirit, right? Because the Lord was with him, and that's really what's most important, right? Because when you talk to a lot of these people, especially in, in the world and so on and so forth, you can tell a lot about these people by the type of conversation and the type of manner of, that they conduct themselves. They're very, very low level. They're not on any, spiritual. They don't have any spiritual like understanding. It's mostly a carnal based culture that we're coming out of. It's very, very carnal based. Not even a little. It's very, very carnal based, right? So for you to, be able to even conduct yourself in a different type of fashion, or even have a different kind of conversation, it sets you apart from all these different people, right? So you don't have to constantly um essentially worry about acquiring the physical to make up for you being a man, right? you know is nothing wrong, and let me say this, there's nothing wrong if you work towards trying to create a better situation for yourself. you know if your car is breaking down, of course you're going to take it to the mechanic and get it fixed, right? Obviously, right? Because Jake can be very, very simple sometimes, but the point is an overemphasis in the spiritual riches, right? Because Yahushua said, I come in the volume of the book. And he also even said, not Yahushua, the scriptures say, but Yahushua said that a man should not live by bread alone, but every word that proceeds out of the Most High, right? So I just want to read this last part here. I want to jump down. So he ends up breaking down, expounding on the Pharaoh's dream, even despite the fact that I think there were some magicians up in the same chapter that they weren't able to expound on that. So a lot of the people don't know the kinds of things that right? That's another thing also, right? Not that we, essentially we get proud, right? But the point and the objective is that, you know, you have more substance in your spirit, right? And that's without having any quote unquote physical, lots of these physical riches, right? That Jake tends to value, in this society, right? So okay, I'll start at verse 38. So Genesis 41 verse 20 verse 38, and it says, and Pharaoh said unto his servants, can we find such a one as this is, a man whom is the spirit of the Most High is? And Pharaoh said to Joseph, for as much as the Most High Yahweh hath showed thee all this, there is none so discreet and wise as thou art. Thou shalt be over my house, and according to all thy word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than thou. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, see, I have set thee over, all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh took his ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and arrayed him in vestures of fine linen, and put a gold chain about his neck, right? So now you start to see the riches within his spirit manifest on the forefront. What Jake does is the complete backwards and the complete opposite. They overemphasize, even a lot of these Israelite camps, if you really think about it too, because they manifest their riches they're on heavily on the outside, right? Rather and neglect the complete inside, right? So I guess I'll leave it there actually. But yeah, that's the recap. Um, Understanding that the riches are more important on the inside as opposed to on the outside, right? And that's another thing that a lot of women are drawn to. And just throwing that out there, right? Um, well, people in general, but mostly women, I find. So that's pretty much it. I didn't want to make the lesson too long, but it's just going to show the importance of having a riches on the inside as opposed to on the outside, right? It shows you on another level that a lot of our people, they over focus on putting the riches on the outside, and they're destitute on the inside. So anyways, I've done quite a bit of rambling, but I sincerely pray and hope that this lesson is edifying, right? Because sometimes, like the first precept I brought up earlier, sometimes we overly focus on, we feel like we need to, acquire these things to make us feel more like a man and all this kind of stuff. Like they always push that vibration in TV and movies and media and all that to make you feel like, and then you feel kind of insignificant if you don't have those things, right? So, but this is just a sentiment of comfort to know that the riches, the more important riches, are actually on the inside, right? So, but anyways, I'll leave it there. But Lord's will, this lesson was edifying. Just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashim Shai. Until next time, I say Shalom.